Tāmati Wāka Nene was a Māori rangatira of the Ngāpuhi iwi who fought as an ally of the British in the Flagstaff War of 1845–46. Origin and mana. Tāmati Wāka Nene was born to chiefly rank in the Ngāpuhi iwi of the Bay of Islands and Hokianga regions of the North Island of New Zealand. His elder brother was Eruera Maipatuone. He was related to Hongi Hika and could trace his ancestry by a number of lines back to Rahiri, the founder of the Ngāpuhi. He rose to be one of the war leaders of the Ngāpuhi, taking an active part in the Musket Wars of 1818 to 1820. He successfully took his warriors on a rampage the whole length of the North Island, killing and plundering as he went until he reached Cook Strait. It is said that he advised Te Rauparaha to acquire muskets to enhance his influence. In 1828 he successfully averted a war between the Māori of the Bay of Islands and the Hokianga. Then his older brother moved south to what is now the Auckland region, Hauraki, and soon after the paramount chief of the area died of wounds received in battle. Wāka Nene now became the highest-ranking chief among his own people and one of the three primary chiefs of the area. At baptism, he added Tāmati Wāka to his name. Support for the Treaty of Waitangi. Early on he had recognized the value of trade with Pakeha and used his position as chief to protect and encourage both the traders and the Methodist missionaries. He was baptized in 1839, taking the name Thomas Walker Tāmati Wāka. He also worked with the British resident, James Busby, to regularize the relationships between the two races. In 1835 he signed the Declaration of the Independence of New Zealand, which proclaimed the sovereignty of the United Tribes. At the negotiations leading up to the signing of the Treaty of Waitangi, Ngāpuhi chief Te Whare he disagreed with his brothers Rua and Moka, Kaingamata, and spoke for peace and the acceptance of the European, and was duly supported by Nene and Patuone. Nene's influence was significant in persuading many of the tribes to sign the treaty. The next few years saw a considerable loss of revenue and influence for the northern tribes. The capital of the new country was soon moved down to Auckland. Customs duties were also imposed. Then the government began to manage the land. Specifically, they temporarily banned any further felling of kauri trees, after a glut formed on the Australian market. Commitment to Governor Fitzroy. On 8 July 1844 the flagstaff on Mikey Hill at the north end of Kororaraka was cut down for the first time by the Pakaraka chief Te Haratua. Heke had set out to cut down the flagstaff but was persuaded by Archdeacon William Williams not to do so. On 24 August 1844 Governor Fitzroy arrived in the bay from Auckland upon the frigate HMS Hazard. Governor Fitzroy summoned the Ngāpuhi chiefs to a conference at the Te Waimate mission at Waimate on 2 September and apparently diffused the situation. Tāmati Wāka Nene requested the governor to remove the troops and redress the native grievances in respect of the customs duties that were put in place in 1841, that Heke and Pomeritu viewed as damaging the maritime trade from which they benefited. Tāmati Wāka Nene and the other Ngāpuhi chiefs undertook to keep Heke in check and to protect the Europeans in Bay of Islands. Hone Heke did not attend but sent a conciliatory letter and offered to replace the flagstaff. On 10 January 1845 the flagstaff was cut down a second time, this time by Heke. He again cut down the flagstaff on 19 January, when Hone Heke cut down the flagpole for the fourth time on 11 March 1845 and attacked Kororaraka. Nene was offended, feeling that his mana had been trampled on. Nene was already at war with Heke when the British troops began to arrive on the scene. Fighting between the warriors of Heke and Nene between Okaiha and Te Ahu. After the attack on Kororaraka, Heke and Te Ruki Kauiti and the warriors travelled inland to Lake Omapri near Te Kaikoe, some 20 miles, or 2 days' travel, for the Bay of Islands. Nene built a park close to Lake Omapri. Heke's pa named Puketuta was 2 miles away, while it is sometimes named as Tamawhai. However, the hill of that name is some distance to the northeast. In April 1845, during the time that the colonial forces were gathering in the Bay of Islands, the warriors of Heke and Nene fought many skirmishes on the small hill named Tāmati Wāka that was between the two pa and on open country, between Okaiha and Te Ahu. Heke's force numbered about 300 men. Kauiti joined Heke towards the end of April with another 150 warriors. Opposing Heke and Kauiti were about 400 warriors that supported Tāmati Wāka Nene, including his brother Eruera Mahipatu-one and the chiefs Makote Taunui and his brother Aprahama Taunui, Mohitawhai, Arama Karakapa and Nopera Panakareau. F.E. Manning, Jackie Marmon and John Webster of Opononi, Hokianga were 3 Pakeha Maori who volunteered to fight with Nene and fought alongside the warriors from Hokianga. Webster used a rifle and had made 200 cartridges. The colonial forces under the command of Lieutenant Colonel William Hume arrived at Hexpa at Puketutu on the 7th of May 1845. Lieutenant Colonel Hume and his second-in-command Major Cyprian Bridge made an inspection of Hexpa and found it to be quite formidable. Lacking any better plan, they decided on a frontal assault the following day. The attack was a failure and the forces retreated to the Bay of Islands. Lieutenant Colonel Hume returned to Auckland and was replaced by Lieutenant Colonel Despard, a soldier who did very little to inspire any confidence in Wāka Nene. Nene's defeat of Heke on the 12th of June 1845 at Pukenui, after the successful defensive Puketutu pa on the shores of Lake Omapri. Heke returned to his pa at Te Ahu. Te Ahu was a short distance from both Hexpa at Puketutu and the site of the later Battle of Oarawa. Some days later he went on to Kaikoe to gather food supplies. During his absence, one of Tāmati Wāka Nene's allies, the Hokianga chief Makote Taunui, attacked and captured Te Ahu. This was a tremendous blow to Hexpa prestige. Obviously it had to be recaptured as soon as possible. The ensuing battle was a traditional formal Maori conflict, taking place in the open with the preliminary challenges and responses. By Maori standards, the battle was considerably large. Heke mustered somewhere between 400 and 500 warriors, while Tāmati Wāka Nene had about 300 men. Heke lost at least 30 warriors. Hugh Carlton provides a brief description of the battle. Rev. Richard Davis also recorded that a Wāka Nene remained in control of Hexpa. Heke was severely wounded and did not rejoin the conflict until some months later, at the closing phase of the Battle of Ruapekapeka. In a letter to Lieutenant Colonel Despard, the battle was described by Wāka Nene as a most complete victory over Heke. Battle of Oarawa. Tāmati Wāka Nene and his warriors supported troops led by Lieutenant Colonel Despard in an attack on Paintaui's pa at Oarawa. Kauiti and Paintaui had strengthened the defenses of the pa. Nene and Despard fought side by side as allies, although Despard had an almost complete incomprehension about Nene's experience in attacking fortified pa. At Oarawa, Nene offered to make a feint attack on the rear of the pa to divert attention from the soldiers' assault, but this suggestion, like all others offered by Nene, met with a refusal. Nene described the British commander, Lieutenant Colonel Despard, as a very stupid man. Despard, on the other hand, said, "If I want help from savages, I will ask for it." History tends to support Nene's opinion, as he had achieved a decisive win against Heke on the 12th of June 1845, with no help from the British. At the Battle of Oarawa, after 2 days of bombardment without effecting a breach, Despard ordered a frontal assault. He was, with difficulty, persuaded to postpone this pending the arrival of a 32-pound naval gun which came the next day, the 1st of July. However, an unexpected sortie from the PA resulted in the temporary occupation of the knoll on which Tāmati Wāka Nene had his camp and the capture of Nene's colours, the Union Jack. The Union Jack was carried into the PA. There it was hoisted, upside down, and at half-mast high, below the Maori flag, which was a kakahu. This insulting display of the Union Jack was the cause of the disaster which ensued. Infuriated by the insult to the Union Jack, Colonel Despard ordered an assault upon the PA the same day. The attack was directed to the section of the PA where the angle of the palisade allowed a double flank from which the defenders of the PA could fire at the attackers. The attack was a reckless endeavor. The British persisted in their attempts to storm the unbreached palisades, and 5 to 7 minutes later 33 were dead and 66 injured, approximately 1/3 of the soldiers and Royal Marines. Battle of Ruapekapeka. Tāmati Wāka Nene and his warriors supported troops led by Lieutenant Colonel Despard in an attack on the PA at Ruapekapeka. Kawiti's tactics was to attempt to repeat the success of the Battle of Oarawa and draw the colonial forces into an attack on heavily fortified PA. The colonial forces started a cannon bombardment of Ruapekapeka on the 27th of December 1845. The siege continued for some 2 weeks with enough patrols and probes from the PA to keep everyone alert. Then, early in the morning of Sunday, the 11th of January 1846, Tāmati Wāka Nene's men discovered that the PA appeared to have been abandoned, although Te Ruki Kawiti and a few of his warriors remained behind, and appeared to have been caught unaware by the British assault. The assaulting force drove Kawiti and his warriors out of the PA. Fighting took place behind the PA and most casualties occurred in this phase of the battle. After the Battle of Ruapekapeka, Heke and Kawiti were ready for peace. It was Wāka Nene they approached to act as the intermediary to negotiate with Governor Gray. Nene insisted that no action should be taken against Heke and Kawiti for leading the war. Mana of Wāka Nene. After the Northern War, the government lost a great deal of mana and influence in the north as a result of the war, much of which flowed to Wāka Nene. He and Heke were recognized as the 2 most influential men in the north. He was given a pension of £100 a year and had a cottage built for him in Kororareka. He continued to advise and assist the government on matters such as the release of Pomeri II in 1846 and Te Rauparaha in 1848. When George Grey was knighted, he chose Nene as one of his esquires. Then, when he returned for his second term of governorship in 1860, he brought Nene a silver cup from Queen Victoria. Nene accompanied Grey to Taranaki to negotiate a truce with Wiremutamihana to end the First Taranaki War in 1861. En route to New Plymouth, the ship struck a huge storm but survived, which was taken as a favourable omen. Wāka Nene died on the 4th of August 1871, and is buried at Russell. The then governor, Sir George Bowen, said the Nene did more than any other Maori to promote colonisation and to establish the Queen's authority.